And good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Saturday, July 1st, 2017 edition of Auto Talk. For the rest of this hour, we'll be discussing matters that are of pertinence to you and your automobile. As always, we hope to impart to you some useful automotive information and perhaps provoke some automotive conversation on this rainy July 1st, Saturday morning in the Mohawk Valley. And I hope the rain goes away so you can all enjoy a nice 4th weekend. It's hard to see the fireworks in the rain, right, guys? Hey, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today, but first I want to get to our car care tip of the week. It talks about vehicle maintenance trends. And we all know that proper maintenance has always been critical to ensuring that your car's safety, reliability, and durability is where it needs to be, right? And of course, today, if you got your owner's manual, there's maintenance booklets, you've got in-vehicle service reminder systems, and of course you've got the internet, and most importantly, you've got me. So it should be easier than ever for you to take care of your car, right? But you know what? The complexity of modern cars combined with conflicting service recommendations from the automakers, repair shops, and advertising campaigns kind of makes it very challenging for us to know exactly what's needed. And of course, the confusion really starts inside many cars where electronic maintenance reminder systems now tell us when it's time for service or when service is near. All these reminders remind you of things like oil changes. Many motorists don't realize that other factory recommended services are required at the same time. What's more, most cars need additional time, or mileage-based services may not get a proper warning by the system. Now, a good example is an oil change reminder light comes on because it's measuring time, not mileage. Sometimes they do that. So let's say your car's only got a few thousand miles on it, but it took a year to put a few thousand miles on because the car is not used a lot. Well, the service light comes on. So now you're wondering, do I really need service, or is there something wrong with my car? Another ongoing conundrum for many folks is where to have their vehicle serviced. Now let's face it, there's a much smaller percentage of us that work on our own vehicles. Do-it-yourselfer has been replaced with do-it-for-me. And I think the majority of us have our cars serviced at car dealerships, independent shops, chain stores, quick lubes, or other locations. But sometimes the maintenance recommendations from these experts can widely vary from one facility to the next. And consumers are often provided with little or no explanation as to why these things are being suggested. And again, everyone has opinions on these things. It's not necessarily bad advice, but you say, okay, what is most correct? And that's what I look at, is what's most correct. If someone says, hey, you should change your oil, well, that's not a bad suggestion. The question is, why do you think it needs to be changed? What is needed? When is it needed? So what is the most correct thing, as an example? That's why it's vital that we understand the needs of today's cars. You know, if you think of some of the ways cars are put together today, first of all, some of them use exotic materials. They have very tight tolerances in their engines. Many require high-quality fluids and lubricants that meet specific specifications. And of course, improved materials means that common components may not show signs of visible wear when they need replacement. A good example is engine cooling systems. They can use a variety of coolants, but not all of which are compatible. There's different kinds of antifreeze out there, as an example. And then you've got hybrid and electric vehicles that have additional cooling components for their batteries and power control electronics. And we talk about automatic transmissions, many of which today come with lifetime fluids and they're sealed at the factory. And then, of course, some cars have such sophistication that just simply disconnecting the battery without taking proper precautions can end up costing lots of money to have the computer reprogrammed. And then on top of that, a routine job like rotating the tires might require a special tool to reset the tire pressure monitoring system. Jeez, this is why we don't want to work on our cars anymore, because it's getting too sophisticated. And of course, another challenge faced by a lot of us is avoiding unnecessary maintenance. Now, the automakers that built the cars know them inside and out and spend millions of dollars to determine what services are needed to ensure long and reliable service, and how often these things need to be performed. But many repair facilities continue to recommend more frequent maintenance, and some upsell customers on service that may not be required by the manufacturer. And again, this is not a dig at anybody in the repair business, because some of this is based on their own opinions and what they believe is the right thing to do. But you know what? Our job here is to advocate for you, the motorist. And I want to make sure that you understand what your needs are, how you should approach them. So there's a couple of things that I'm going to give you 5 basic recommendations that maybe you want to think about. First order of business, you want to follow the manufacturer's factory recommended maintenance schedule as listed in the owner's manual or maintenance booklet. That's number 1. And I would recommend you get familiar with what's in it. Number 2, if a vehicle has a computerized maintenance reminder system, trust it to determine the car's basic intervals. In some cases, it could be longer than what you're used to in an older vehicle. A good example is oil changes. It's very, very common for a car to have a 5,000 to 10,000 mile oil change interval now. So a great example of this is the old 3 months, 3,000 miles, which is what I talked about 30 years ago on the air, which we lived by. Is not necessarily true today. As a matter of fact, it's not true at all, with rare exceptions. And I'll give you the rare exception. If you've got an older car, if you've got a 15-year-old car that you're driving with a lot of miles on it, I would continue to do the old-fashioned 3-month, 3,000 mile oil change. But if you're driving a newer car, and I'd say newer than 7 or 8 years old, you probably don't need to do that anymore. Now, the third point is, because modern cars have extended service intervals, it's very important not to forget to do things like check the oil. Imagine if you're leaking or using some oil and not realizing it, and you never check it because you never change it. Well, that would be a problem. The same goes with tire pressures. You know, we talk about those tire pressure monitoring systems, but they generally don't come on until you've lost about 25% of the air pressure in your tires. Well, 25% is a lot. So if you think of a 30-pound pressure in a tire, roughly 6 pounds of air would have to be out of that thing before the tire pressure monitoring system would kick on. But if you're driving around with 5 pounds less air, it's not going to probably come on. And that could wear your tires out pretty quick. So this is a good example. So once a month, you want to still check your tire pressures, which I do at home and recommend you do. Now, the other thing is what you put in your vehicle. Replacement fluids and lubricants used in servicing today's vehicles must meet the automaker specs to make sure that things work right. I will tell you that you want to be exactly sure the kind of antifreeze and oil that you're putting in your car meets the specifications of that vehicle. And there's a lot of viscosity issues with oil these days. There's cars that run on 0-weight oil, 5-weight oil, 10-weight oil, and you want to make sure that you're using what belongs in the car. And it's important you choose the right one. And my other last recommendation on this topic is, obviously you want to make sure you identify a quality repair shop to do your business with. And a couple of points on that is it's about a 50-50 mix in the real world. People who want to go back to the car dealership and people who use an independent repair shop. That's a personal, basically, trend line of people, what they want to do. A lot of times, for example, a car dealership doesn't have convenient hours for people who work late in the day or can't get into the service department until, let's say, noon on a Saturday. You're not going to find too many car dealerships open in those hours. Some do, but very few. So sometimes it's a matter of convenience what shop you use. But you want to make sure you use one that's well established, well known, has a good reputation, and you have a conversation with them so you understand where they're coming from. Again, you want to make sure that you're not going to be over-recommended just based on someone's personal opinion of things. And one couple of other things while I'm talking about this, you want to maintain complete vehicle service records in hard copy. You can use an online application, but you really need to keep records of everything you do in hard copy in a folder and staple receipts to it. Even if I buy an air filter and put it in, I date it, put it in my file, so I know when the last time I did that. There are some electronic online applications for checking car maintenance, and some of them are pretty good, but I like a good hard copy. And then lastly, again, to save money and avoid over maintenance, always consider carefully the value of performing extra services not required by the vehicle manufacturers. Your car is a mechanical device. It's not a pet. So buying your car something extra is not going to make it feel good. It either needs it or it don't. There are some services you want to look at over time. For example, is it still good to basically to flush your cooling system every once in a while? Yes, it is. Is it good every once in a while to actually change your brake fluid? Yes, it is. These are things that do deteriorate over time. Again, transmission fluid change when necessary or when recommended by the manufacturer, although sometimes you're not going to have the ability to do that. Some transmissions are sealed at the factory. And then the last point about this is additives are to be used, in my opinion, on a very rare basis. My best example of using an additive is a fuel injection cleaner. If you, for example, drive in the city all the time and that's all you do, if you're going to take a road trip, running a can of fuel injection cleaner through the fuel tank just to help get any deposits off the fuel system is not a bad thing. But do you need it every week? Absolutely not. Do you need to put a top end oil? For example, in the old days we would use an oil to try to get deposits off of lifters so they wouldn't make noise. So there was a thin oil like Marvel Mystery Oil or Rizlone. You don't need that in a modern engine. Example, put a can of Motor Honey or STP in it. You don't need that in a modern engine. Again, if you've got an old engine with lots of miles on it where the tolerances inside the engine are getting sloppy, again, there's a time and a place for some of these additives. If you have a transmission being serviced and you're using you're going to change the transmission fluid, do you want to put an additive in that bolsters the transmission oil to help with shifting and getting any deposits inside the transmission loosened up so that the valves inside the transmission, the valve body is working correctly? That might be a bad idea. But again, we're talking about using chemicals on an older vehicle with lots of miles. Newer car, you don't need it. Car's got everything it needs as long as you use what's in it, what you're supposed to have in it. Period. Dot. And I think lastly, and again we can talk about this for quite a while, if you've got a hybrid or EV cooling system in your car, most of these electric vehicles and hybrids have a special cooling system that helps regulate the temperature of the batteries and the control module electronics. Now, these functions might be integrated into the regular cooling system, or they can be handled entirely separated by a separate system. Either way, it's critical that they only be filled again with coolants that meet your specifications. In addition, many of these have to be properly filled, and there's got to be a bleeding procedure be carefully followed to ensure that every bit of air is removed from the cooling system, or you can end up with some significant damage. So, some of them require the use of special tools to create a mild vacuum in the cooling system. Again, this is something you're not going to do in your driveway. So, again, folks, read your owner's manual and use that as a guide. And if someone wants to sell you an extra service, ask them why they think you need it, and you can evaluate it from there.